Same old trouble, villains always knocking at the door. Pretty pictures on the page, but nothing ever stays the same.
Thank you, Vandello, and welcome once again to Graphically Novel. My name is Josh Wasta, a.k.a. Fallout Fury. With me, as always, is my sibling when I need the most, my caretaker. It's Bear.
At least you didn't say you were his keeper.
Yeah, well, and to quote Isaac from the novel, he gave me more credit than I was due. And with us, as usual, the lovely and talented, the Baronessa, Ms. Jennifer Howland.
Thank you, Bear. And as it is my pleasure this season and last, and probably forevermore, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our guest. And today we have someone who has actually become a good friend of mine, although we have never met in person. So I'm very much looking forward to this episode. Thank you for joining us, Justin Stacy.
Hey!
Thank you, Jen. Great to be here, and I appreciate you guys asking me in for the Hellstrom episode.
Absolutely. So this season, we are inviting people. We're choosing who we have for which episode. When Hellstrom came on, I knew I wanted you on the show eventually, and I think we talked a little bit about, hey, have you watched any of this? You know, when it first came out.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was just kind of that interesting, especially since you are a huge fan of Constantine. And we didn't have you on the Constantine episode, because I don't even think we were doing guests when we did Constantine.
No, I don't think we were.
Yeah. And so we brought you on to Marvel's version of Constantine, for better or for worse.
Worse.
But
Worse.
It's hard to top Constantine, to be fair. So It
is.
That is fair.
Especially in a comic where the character all but says he's a poor man's John Constantine.
Yeah.
So, Justin, what is your history with comic books?
Unlike a lot of enthusiasts, I didn't really read them a ton as a younger kid. It kind of took me to my mid-teens basically before I was really into comics. And I guess Batman was probably my first, and is still pretty high up there in terms of favorite. But I moved on to things like Hellblazer pretty early as well. Some of the more out there kind of weirder stuff. And I think it was partially because I didn't read much in the way of comics as a younger kid, and I just kind of went overboard with it a little bit as I got older and kind of dived into it pretty quickly. So anything, I read a lot of the standard DC and Marvel stuff that a lot of people like, but then I branched out into some of the more obscure stuff. And I don't know, it's just it's a great medium for expression and telling a bunch of different stories in a way that isn't quite capturable in cinema or TV, really. So.
Right, and that's kind of what we focus on in this show is how do you take something, like Alan Moore's From Hell and make it into a Johnny Depp fronted movie.
Right.
Right. And this is definitely one of those, because for those who are not familiar with Hellstrom, or in this eventually Hellstorm as he takes the moniker,
so much time they spent on that.
And actually, that's one of the things that I guess we should probably get into, because I was very curious about that as kind of the newcomer to this particular title, is the changes between those two names, which, as you guys know, happen quite frequently in the arc that we'll be discussing today. And I was like, they're devoting a bunch of time to the switch between those two names, and I'm kind of intrigued by that.
Well, but yes, and I have that answer. But where I was getting is the full name is Damon Hellstrom, son of Satan. Like, when it was introduced in the 70s, that was the full name of the comic. The show kind of strays away from the whole son of the big guy.
Yeah.
Like, it's more of, I'm a son of a demon.
Yeah.
Well, and they keep mentioning over and over again that they never really give you the background in the TV series.
No.
When he does encounter a demon, they keep calling him traitor.
Yeah.
And that's about all you get. And they're like, ooh, what's this? Are they going to give us a little backstory? Is there going to be anything behind this? The plot line kind of leads you to exactly what they're talking about eventually. But
so for the comic, there was a series in 1993 that was done out of Marvel. It actually had two different writers. So the first 4 issues were written by Rafael Nieves, who I started to look into the writer. He was fired after 4 issues.
I can see why.
I did not actually know that he was fired. I didn't look too deeply into that. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And then Len Kaminsky took over after that, but we only read the first 5, like basically the first story arc. And as always on our Facebook page for the announcement for this episode, we'll have the cover. So if you want to follow along and find out what graphic novel we read, it'll be there. But the reason that the Hellstorm thing happened is because writers were very insistent on the name.
Is that why?
Yes. Even though Hellstrom was the first son of Satan, it became Hellstorm with 2 L's and O. It became Hellstorm with 1 L. It became Hellstrom with 2 L's. Like, just extremely.
Basically, writers can't spell for shit
or didn't care.
Yeah, they're not paying enough attention.
It was sort of like how they changed the colors of various comic book characters back in the day, I guess.
Right. It's like how Hulk was originally gray because they couldn't afford green.
Sure.
Right. Yeah.
And then somebody came around and went, well, there's a gray Hulk and there's a green
Hulk. And then
Hulk.
there's a green Hulk.
Right.
And guess what? Now there's a red Hulk.
Right.
And
well, as a try to retcon basically a mistake. That's what this was. This, you could tell in the first 4 issues, while it was not quality, this writer was just taking the piss out of all of comic books.
Oh, yeah. Completely. Is it the first issue? The first issue? The author mentions, not by name, but by description, that you cannot miss the stretchy guy from the Fantastic Four.
Mr. Fantastic.
Stretch Armstrong, please.
She couldn't remember Reed Richards. She was asking me today, who's the stretchy guy? Stretch Armstrong. I'm like, you mean Reed Richards?
Like, yeah, whatever. I don't know the Fantastic Four, obviously. Superman was referenced, and Constantine, and the X-Men were referenced.
Right.
Yep.
And that was just in the first.
Okay, the X-Men came later.
But but the other 3 references happened on page 4.
Yeah.
Like within 3 frames of each other.
It's like, wow.
Yeah. So let's jump into the show. Justin, what did you think of the show? As it turns out, the only season of the show that we're going to get as of a couple days ago.
The show is interesting for me simply for a couple of reasons. First is that when I saw the trailer, I was like, that intrigues me simply because I can see the sort of urban fantasy vibe they're going for, and anything like that is going to intrigue me personally. It's one of my favorite subgenres. But overall, it was fine. And I think that to look at it critically, it kind of reminds me of the Constantine film with Keanu Reeves, in the sense that it may not be a great adaptation of source material, but if you divorce it from the source material and you just look at it as a sort of run-of-the-mill urban fantasy sort of thing with supernatural elements, I think you can have a lot of fun with it and be entertained by it to some degree anyway. And,
absolutely. I agree.
Well, especially in the direction that they went, because Hellstrom in this, and what we read, is very much tied into what I would call the B list of the Marvel universe.
Yes,
for sure.
You could tell that he's a 70s character that they were trying to reboot in the 90s. And it's Patsy shows up, our friend Patsy Hellcat from Jessica Jones.
Super shocking to me, by the way.
Yeah, that was pretty shocking to me too. Most people now know Patsy from Jessica Jones, which was on Netflix.
Right.
But keep in mind that Patsy and Jessica Jones was a replacement for Ms. Marvel, for Carol Danvers, that her and Jessica were friends in the comics. So it's amusing to me that, instead of even try in the Hulu show, they're just like, there's no mention of the Marvel universe at all.
Thank God. It would have sucked ass.
Right.
Seriously. The show was good because, as you said, Justin, it tried to be a set piece. It tried to be something outside of the source material. And I think that they did a good job of that. And it was interesting. And I actually was expecting a lot more from the comic going from the show to the comic.
Sure.
Amen.
Sure.
This show was actually decent in my mind.
Having
never.
I would
go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree. Decent is actually the word that comes to mind for me. When you take the sum of all the parts and put them together, I think it's not as bad as some people would have you believe.
The thing that I thought was Jenn started to get more interested as the series went along. I got less interested because, as I know, my good friend Bear, he has a sticking point about time travel.
I
Time
do.
travel has to be done extremely well or not at all.
Exactly. No, it gets so tedious after a while, and it can ruin so many things.
I'm the same way with Christian dogma. There's just so much of it that unless you're going to do...
I got to comment on the juxtaposition there. Time travel. Oh, I'm the same way with Christian dogma. Okay, all right.
Well, yeah. I mean, personally, I don't have faith in either one.
I don't think either one can do anything right with those two topics.
I know you fairly well, and I actually was a little surprised at that. That was a little jarring, that comparison there.
Lack of segue.
Yeah. Well, and I think that they kind of had to do it, like the way that the show was set up, they kind of had to do that, the dogma, and I think they did it in a good way. It could have been a lot heavier handed.
Yeah.
And I also liked that they brought in the blood, like this sort of offshoot of the Catholic Church that operates outside of their purview. The radical Catholic.
Yeah.
That just feels so funny saying.
Well, so the other part is in the show they have factions of the church, which usually I'm a big fan. You have Gabrielle, you have the nun that is assigned to Damon, which is awesome to bring her in, and she's our eye, even though she's about to take her vows and she's part of this thing. She has the faith in the church that very slowly starts to get eroded because she starts to find out more and more that there's this faction that will exorcise the demons. That's the one that she's part of. And then there's this faction that's like, no, I mean, basically we could trap them in a jar for 50 years. So we'll just put people in a coma.
Until the person dies.
Right. And then the demon, returns. But at least you've taken them out of play for 50 years. And that's a very human response because, demons are like, okay, 50 years, fuck it. Yeah.
I'll just have a snooze.
Yeah. See you when I get better phone reception. Like, But to humans, it's at least like, well, at least we've taken this out of play for 50 years. Not even thinking about they are legion and they are many, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. But I liked that aspect. And I found as the show kept going, it was just like, I think the show could have been, instead of 10 episodes, it could have been a miniseries.
Yeah.
Because I found myself like, I would go up to get a drink or something. Like Damon and Gabrielle are talking, like towards the end, like episode 9 or 10. And I'm just like, oh, hey, I know exactly what this entire conversation is going to be, and it's not going to affect fuck all. So I go up, I get a drink, I use the restroom, I come back, it's like 4 or 5 minutes later, and that scene is just ending. And I have not missed anything.
Yeah.
And
but
I
then
guess
it still had moments where if you walked out of the room just to grab a drink and came right back, it just jumped really fast.
Right.
It was a little chunky like that. So.
Well, and there were sometimes, in fact, there were several times that you were playing on your phone and you were listening, but you weren't watching. And I'm like, you're going to want to rewind that. Yeah. And you were like, I heard everything. I'm like, you didn't see it though.
Right. Yeah. There was a lot of stuff visually in the background.
And I thought that the characters were well done. I thought that for the most part, the main characters were well done. The gay business partner tropey thing was a little but
yeah. Although they even took that and made him, to change him into the keeper. His storyline I was very interested in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I liked him as a character as well. I thought he was a pretty cool character. Generally.
I was actually kind of impressed by the diversity that they managed to work into this god-awfully whitewashed comic book, because high 90s. I think you saw one black person in the whole comic
was in
book,
the bar.
and it was in the bar, and she was just hanging all over David.
Oh, that's right.
That was I remember that. Another slightly confusing scene for me, actually. I wasn't quite sure what was going on there.
I started that issue off going, ooh, look, we've got Doctor Strange. This should be at least a little... Yeah. And then we just got flashbacks.
So this may explain something. Justin, you may not be as familiar as I know Jenn and Bear are. Can you hand me that comic book over there? The Vampire the Masquerade from Moonstone Publishing that came out in the mid-90s. No, 2002. All stories written by Raphael Nieves. The person that wrote the first 4 issues of this.
Oh, that explains so much.
If you've ever read this, it is.
I have not.
Every clan gets their own story, and he wrote stories for Toreador, Nosferatu, and Ventrue in a comic book.
Did he? Okay. So we're getting
Is that a good read?
If you like Vampire the Masquerade, it's very nice.
I do,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But was he involved with? Remember the clan novels?
No, nothing to do with the clan novels.
Okay, because I read those.
Yeah, those
were
good.
actually good.
I read some of those. Yeah,
I read those.
Yeah, I've read a couple of those. Yeah.
Yeah, that was very well done, and in fact, they redid that entire storyline in order, like in order of events.
Yeah.
Instead of jumping around in all the different novels.
Yeah.
And it's really good. It's really good to read it that way.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah. No, my favorite. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the Vampire the Masquerade novels. That's 2 steps beyond what we're talking about. But yes, the comic is amusing if you can come across it. I bought it years ago because in Iowa City, Iguana's comic going out of business, and I happened to have like $300, which was unheard of for me at that time. And I bought everything at like 80% off. It's where I got a lot of Changeling the Dreaming like cards that they originally had to use. But yeah, like just a bunch of crap. But anyway, I found it interesting that this writer, once I knew that and I pulled it off the shelf and I just kind of flipped through it, I was like, yeah, it's the same like over dramatic like I have a couple.
Does he rename the clan?
No.
Okay, because we all know that the editors that were involved with anything White Wolf sucked.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that would have been amusing.
Yes. And at no point did like a Toreador get upset and yell, "Who could love the son of Satan?" Which is actually something said in the comic. It was bad.
Pretty much just like that too, from what I can tell. Like,
Well, and we had lots of as you did in comics. There were crossovers, like characters from other comics would show up in this one. But this one, I'm not sure who is a member of the West Coast Avengers, but they've got to be low rent Avengers because
Extreme,
yeah. So I was like, wow, this guy doesn't even get like the real Avengers.
Oh God, no.
And that whole issue was literally just like, how many superheroes can I fit into here? For like,
how many will they let me?
Will they let me?
Because Doctor Strange is very obviously the big.
Yeah. Well,
I think the biggest, because that's Valkyrie.
No, keep going.
Oh, this is the West Coast Avengers.
But there was another one.
I know what she's talking. Yeah,
this is the West Coast Avengers. Whatever, against the villain Master Pandemonium.
So Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Iron Man. Thunderbird.
Is that?
That's Hellstrom.
Okay.
And I don't even know who that is at the end.
And then who's that? Is that
Hellcat? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
But the other thing that I found striking was, so he's got this sort of mansion that is there but not there, Constantine.
Yeah.
And then he's got a gargoyle that watches over the mansion for him, Constantine.
Well, who when the demon sees him, basically starts to really nudge into the Etrigate.
Yes.
And the gargoyle has to correct
I immediately
him.
thought of, yeah.
And the gargoyle has to
the
correct
first
him and be
panel
like,
I saw him in, that's who I thought it was, actually. I saw the first panel, I was like, what?
Me too.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing is that the comic book references, so he references like Constantine as if he's a person. And then Isaac, the gargoyle, talks about Master Wayne like he's Batman. And Damon is like, have you been in my comic books again?
Yeah.
So, like, does DC exist all these comics? Is Constantine like a person? Like, what is happening?
Right.
Well, and I was reading through it. I was over at our friends Kat and Troy's place, and I got into that first, like that page 4 where they start talking about, you get the Superman reference and you get the, the Reed Richards reference and all that stuff.
Stretch Armstrong.
Yeah, Stretch Armstrong.
Oh, I can't wait till our Fantastic Four episode. Tune in next time.
Oh, yeah, because then I get to bitch about all of the movies.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I've got to work on renaming all the characters now.
But I'm reading through this, and I'm like, oh, okay, this should be interesting. This doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's actually got this tied in with everything else. And then that was it. And then I was actually saying to Josh just before we started recording how this felt like Dark Phoenix, only worse, because I cared enough about Dark Phoenix to be angry that I had to go through it. And this, I was just like fighting. The only thing I was fighting was fighting not to fall asleep.
Distraction.
Yeah.
So, I just a couple quotes that I have here because we've talked about Constantine. How he references Constantine is, I know a Brit in a similar line of work smoked like a fiend. And I'm like, it just reminded me that I could be reading Constantine.
So it's safe to say there are no diehard Hellstrom fans here as far as the comics go. I guess.
Not as far as this one goes. No.
I have a challenge. I have a challenge for the end, and I've teased my two co-hosts with it. So we'll see. Let's see. Although there are a couple good lines in here. Self-worth is exactly 1 month's rent and the cost of a bottle of rum. I may have that tattooed on myself.
Oh God, no.
So let's talk about Anna in the show and her roots, which you don't get to read in the first 5 issues, but you get told about her because she is the Marvel character Satana.
Mm-hmm. And the favorite of their father.
Which they kept in the show.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So they actually kept barely.
No, but they didn't because, they did, okay. But in the comic, you get the idea that Satana is father's favorite, and she enjoys being father's favorite. She enjoys spending time with him and learning from him and doing that, and Anna in the show does not.
Right. Well, I think you have so many siblings at odds right now in a lot of comic book properties. I mean, the newest and first one that comes to mind is Batwoman. Where you've got
Alice.
Yeah, Alice and Kane. Kane. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's an actually interesting. I was kidnapped. My sister didn't find me. I went crazy. That's a pretty interesting story. This one would have just been like, Father chose you. No, I will refuse. And having them at odds and then eventually moving their way to working together was a lot more interesting.
Well, and the whole, in the show, the mother is powerless to protect the children. In the comic, and I'm going to do this spoiler just because it makes sense for the comparison. The mother is placed in a mental institution because she goes crazy after giving birth to Satana.
Right, and is dead. Well, she goes.
I thought she was
died.
just.
She does die eventually, but that's really all you hear about.
Right.
You hear about that. They talk about.
She is a minor character.
Yeah, that's also not why she went crazy.
Okay.
They don't really talk about why she went crazy.
She went crazy. Well, and that was one of those interesting nods to, because they just talk about what happened in the basement is why she went crazy.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And that it was Satana doing it to her instead of the father.
The father, yeah.
So in the show, they make a meal out of that, which is great.
Yeah.
In the comic, they just kind of mention it and you're supposed to fill in what happened.
And one other thing in the comic that I took umbrage with was, the mother was specifically called out, a descendant from a Mayflower crosser, someone who came over on the Mayflower. I'm like, what?
They never say her last name.
I know.
Could have been Howland.
It could have been Howland.
You could be Satana for all we know.
I thought we weren't going to give spoilers in this episode.
You just put up a Christmas tree and didn't burn us in the flames, so I'm just saying.
It's a tree. It's a Yule tree.
So we talked about Yen. Let's talk about the addition of Caretaker and Louise to the show. Obviously not really in the comic. Was that better for you guys? Worse? Did you enjoy those characters and their stories?
I personally did. I think that's kind of where aside from the fact that we didn't start off with, I am the son of Satan from the beginning of the TV
series.
Love
the son of Satan.
Right,
exactly.
Right.
We didn't start with that from the very beginning of the TV series. I actually thought that what they did with the series was much more palatable.
Yeah. They didn't introduce really demons until, it was probably the second episode or the third, but.
Well, they had to keep her skull.
Yeah, they did that in the first episode, but that was about it.
Yeah, that was one of the coolest scenes of the first episode for me, was when they found all that stuff down in the catacombs. Actually, that was a cool effect. And but yeah.
Well, I thought it was well done because of the way that the children were separated when they were younger and kind of the path that they had to take. I feel like there could have been some reconciliation when they were, before they were in their 20s.
Right.
Just because Louise and the caretaker knew each other. They had a relationship. And why they kept, it was like they kept, never mind. I'm remembering now. Because they were keeping them apart. Right. Because they would be too powerful together.
Right. And Taker was in the block.
Well, and you did get that one line, the last thing that we need.
Caretaker, not Taker.
They call him Taker.
They call him Taker. It's true. It's true. They call him Taker.
But he didn't have a. I was gonna say he didn't have a big ass hat and a motorcycle. So
he either has a big ass hat or a motorcycle. He's Biker Taker or he's Undertaker.
but this is a completely different character. So
Yeah.
he could have a big ass hat and a motorcycle.
Right.
He could be the American caretaker.
Okay, come on.
No, the point I was going to make was they had the line at one point early on in the series is that the last thing we need is a Hellstrom family reunion.
Yes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that explains a little bit more why they kept them apart as long as they did.
Well, and one of the things that I really liked was when you're first introduced to Anna, and she's on that rooftop, and it's like, okay, she's a sin eater. She's like getting rid of bad dudes. This is awesome, but and I also like how they kind of like teased their powers throughout that first season. It's like, well, she can touch stuff, she's sensitive to whatever, but it's like, you don't see what they can do until you get towards the end of the season, which I thought was really
right.
well done.
Well, and that they have each other's powers, they just spec differently as they grew.
Well, because they grew up apart and
Right.
they were taught by different people.
Right. Justin, any thoughts on Caretaker and
Well,
Louise?
Yeah, I overall I liked the addition of them simply as I think for what we could reasonably define as secondary characters. I think the writers went out of their way to make them pretty prominent throughout the whole show. Both of them are in, I don't know if both of them are in every single episode, but they get plenty of screen time as secondary characters, and they each represent a sort of patriarchal or matriarchal figure to each one of the two siblings that they're kind of tasked with raising, and I kind of like that aspect of it.
Yeah.
They each have adults, positive, well, depending on how you define it, relatively positive adult influences that kind of help shape them as they grow older. And to sort of jump off that, one of the things I was kind of expecting before I started the show, which I was surprised was not there, but was actually good. I kind of expected the characters to be both completely kind of bitter, misanthropic people due to their childhoods. And to some degree, that is true. But mostly, especially in Damon's case, you have a character that I completely did not expect to be a fairly kind of caring and sort of selfless character, which was kind of nice to see in a way, I thought.
Well, and they hint at that in the first episode, like when he goes and the kid's like pretending to be possessed.
Yeah.
And he like totally calls him out on it, and he's a dick to the parents. He's just like, get the therapy. And like he's walking away. I'm like, okay, so we're kind of going with that. Again, I was like, okay, we're going with that Constantine vibe. That's where we're going. And it very quickly, Damon became a separate character from Constantine. He became his own character. Not so much in the comic. I just kind of saw it as you're Constantine, like or you're trying to be Constantine.
Well, but
Constantine with phenomenal cosmic power.
Well, but he was in the comic. He knew he was the son of Satan.
Right.
He knew who he was. He knew what his background was. He knew what his powers were. He knew all of this stuff. And I really thought that the idea that the siblings in the TV show were kind of ripped from that, and they weren't given all the information. I hesitate to say needed, but they are not given the information that could make them what you would potentially think their father would want them to be.
Sure.
They're kind of raised in the wild, so to speak, It's like, they've got stuff going on. They understand that they're different. They understand that there are things in their life. I mean, especially Anna in the show. I mean, she's
you can see,
I mean, she's taken.
You can see where she would be bitter and somewhat misanthropic as she goes.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly.
Which she is, but I would argue she's the better adjusted out of the two.
All right, I want to hear the argument.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
She has a successful business that she's doing on her own. Yes, she's killing people, but I mean, when it comes down to it, she is very much I have made one friend. My friend is Yen. Damon doesn't have that. Damon doesn't have the one person that he ever trusted because he grew up in the church system.
Well, he had Louise
as a mother figure, same as Anna had Caretaker.
But Louise, and Louise are much more like their relationship is much closer than Anna and the Caretaker. Also, I mean, Damon is a professor. He's a college professor.
Right.
So, I mean, the idea that he's got a career. He's got something that he's focusing on.
Well, they also discussed too that Yen is not really a friend. Yen is like her manservant.
Right.
But, well, it's business partner.
Yeah. But it's also her childhood friend.
Yeah.
Because they get into that. It is jarring a little bit once you find out that like he protected her growing up in the orphanage,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But that's just, I think he also makes amends with that because he has a lifestyle that he prefers, and she has provided that. He's able to have that because of their friendship and growing up. And she just has fallen into her role, which, yes, she's not a great person. I would argue she's a better person than Damon is.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would agree with that either. I mean, I think...
Do you think she's better because she's like more honest about who she is and what she wants, or is there other reasons you think she's a...
No, I think that's accurate. I mean, she has every right to be bitter. She, you know, and to be kept apart from her brother and all that stuff. And basically the system was set up so that in her perspective, she had to have Yen. Because if she didn't have Yen, she would have been completely alone in that system, caretaker or no caretaker, you know. And Damon got to be raised in the cushy church with Louise and, you know.
But it wasn't the cushy church. I mean, yes, she was aligned with the church, but he grew up with a woman who runs an asylum. Like, how much better? That's not cushy. That's not...
I don't know. He didn't grow up in the asylum, though. He grew up with her. It's like if your mom
was
running an asylum that
never,
happens to have your mom in it. Like your real mom.
That's never really discussed, though. Like, you see him when Anna is taken at, 12 or something?
You're right.
And then you see him as an adult, and he's, you know, like, Louise has
visiting his mom all the time, you know.
Yeah.
Right, but you also get what Anna says in the early episodes and why she is upset and why she's bitter is because she couldn't go and see her mother. She, even after she got away from her dad, she was stuck into an orphanage away from Damon, you know, and away from her mom, and away. Like she was in her words shuffled off and forgot.
Right.
You know? And I could understand that. I can understand why there would be resentment. I just think that given the two circumstances, they're both equally dickish. So Anna wins in my estimation because she had to face more. She could have been way worse. I mean, she could have been satanic.
Yeah, well, yeah. And that's something that I really enjoyed about the contrast is that I like that the characters of the show are who they are, especially Anna, versus what they could have been from the arc that we're reading now. Is I like the characters better in the show, which is not generally the way I feel about you know, adaptations, but
agreed.
In this case, I think it works. And you're right, she could have been way worse. That's true.
No, I was just going to call back to when you said, because your original argument was that Anna was the one that was more well-adjusted. And I'm like, no. And my number one argument against that is that she is actively going around killing people.
They're killing bad people.
I mean, Damon is exorcising demons, but he is doing his resolute best to save the person every time. He might be dickish to, you know, like the kid that was, you know, pretending he was possessed, and the parents that obviously only gave a shit once the kid literally started smearing his own shit on the walls.
Yeah.
But he's not actively going around killing people.
Right. Well, and the way that she like in the beginning of the series, the way she treats Yen is not very positive at all.
And he mentions that, Yen mentions that a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, well, especially once he gets deep into the keeper. He really brings it up then.
Yeah.
So you know he does have a little bit of resentment when it comes to that.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
Oh, yeah. So getting back to the comic, I found it really interesting that this is completely an aside, and we're going back to the ridiculous world of the comic. When a woman was possessed in the comic, when she was possessed by a demon, all of a sudden she was naked. Like, she was just naked. If a man was possessed by a demon, he turns into the Hulk. He turns into this big, beefy thing.
He-Man, the Hulk, take your pick. He's suddenly like massively muscled. Yeah. Whereas the woman is suddenly
also completely completely covered. Like not even like when they're showing their chest.
Yeah.
It's
you
not
don't even
nipples.
see man nipples. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like whoa, 90s.
Yeah,
well, 90s is exactly, you know, that's exactly the reaction I had to some of the dialogue they put in. I mean, we've touched on that already, but especially the scene I think you're referencing in the airport, when the daughter is, you know, complimenting her mom on her nice butt or whatever. I'm like, that's such a cheesy 90s thing to put in the comic. And it's just, you know, it's something you still see humor in comics today, but yeah.
Right. Another note that I had was, demonic possession or not, I don't think I will ever utter the words nice butt, mom.
Right. Right. It's just a comic 90s thing that you don't see today. You see, humor, but it's not that. It's not that anymore. So.
Yeah.
And I'd like to point out that comment is made after they are no longer possessed.
Yes, it's true.
Right. Yes.
So it's not like it was the
Excellent
demon
point.
talking.
Yeah.
I was amused that the spell that the excommunicated priest was reading off in the John, the spell of protection, ended up having a lot of Lovecraftian old
Patagons.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You saw a lot of Patagon.
Yeah.
You saw a lot of you saw all that in there.
That's actually another throwback to Constantine, because you'll see that in Constantine too.
Yeah.
Latin and Lovecraftian babble.
Yeah.
All right. Before the last question, which is different than our normal question.
Oh.
Because you already know the answer to the normal question.
Yeah, the normal question of would you keep reading this? I know that. Is there? Okay. First of all, anybody have anything?
No, I'm good.
I'm good.
Is there any way that I could say something that would make you want to read more of this?
I don't know if the microphone picked that up, but that was a long-suffering sigh from me.
Yeah. Look, I kind of thought about that as I was, going through this arc, and I was like, the only way I would probably continue with this stuff is if they got deeper into stuff that I've probably already seen in Hellblazer or Lucifer, honestly. And I've already read, both of those comics, and I've seen a lot of the stuff that's in Hellstrom done a lot better in those. But if they tried to put a unique spin on a lot of those elements, like the going to hell stuff, or maybe the medications that the angels make that make you hallucinate or something, there's a few things they could do that might make me want to read more, but I've seen most of that stuff done better already. So,
Jen?
I don't know.
As you were talking, Justin, I just, my eyes got big and I was like, okay, what would make me read more is if Lucifer was Hellstrom's dad. I would read
I would
that.
totally read that.
Yeah.
DC Comics Lucifer
Yeah.
specifically.
Yeah, DC Comics Lucifer,
Yep.
not
Would totally read that.
Fair?
It'd have to be good. You'd have to come up with something real good.
So in my research, this book that we read is issues 1 through 11,
Mm-hmm.
and it was Raphael Nieves 1 through 4.
Mm-hmm.
After that, Len Kaminsky.
You're gonna tell me there's Alan Moore?
No,
Hellstrom.
no, I am not.
Oh,
After issue 11, Marvel reached out and decided that this was a comic that was like an onboarding thing. Yeah, this guy didn't work. This guy didn't work. So they recruited a new writer from little-known English magazines to start from issue 12 to go all the way till it's the final issue of number 21. And that man's name was Warren Ellis.
God damn it.
It was his first real comic book
Job.
run. Yes.
Oh my god.
Other than doing British tabloid magazines.
All right, fine. I'll read it. Yes.
What
I'll
season
keep
do we start
reading.
the revisits? 'Cause
Oh.
Justin, I don't know if that's enticing to you at all, but Warren Ellis running this.
Yep. It's definitely worth another, 10 issues at least. So
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And that's all he's got. 9 issues from
12 through 21.
11.
Okay,
So
so 11, 10, yeah.
But I mean, yeah, and we only read 1 through 5 of this, and the reason that we did.
I started skimming through 6, and I was just like,
No.
I don't need to start another arc.
Although there's that. Sorry, there's a puppet kid with a birthday hat on, holding a knife. But yeah, the reason that I had to go with this is it does have the similar story to show. It has the beginnings when it was rebooted, when it was not Son of Satan. So, all right, Justin, thank you so much for joining us. This has been
Thanks for having me, guys.
Absolutely. We'll see if we can find something maybe a little more enjoyable for the next time we have you on.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on the show.
I would love to be back. And guys, if you ever cover something like Moon Knight after the show drops, maybe I would love to come back for Moon Knight.
Oh, there we go. I'll book you in for Moon Knight.
All right.
Don't know what that is.
Neither do I.
He is
It's
imagine the
Marvel's
Punisher.
sort of.
The Punisher. If the Punisher was possessed by Egyptian gods,
With a little bit of Batman mixed in.
with a little Batman.
Quite a bit of Batman, actually. Let's face it. But
I think you had me up until you said that, man.
Yeah, the Egyptian gods basically push his psyche to closer to like Deadpool, but he's not wacky
Wait,
like
so
Deadpool.
it's like
talking
Hawk
about it. You
and-
had me, and then you were.
Wait, it's
you
like
kept
Hawk
describing.
and the
Hawk and Dove.
Yeah, is
No,
that
not quite like Hawk and Dove.
okay?
No, Moon Knight is legitimately crazy. But yeah, it's
but like Legion crazy or like
he's got an identity disorder issue.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Color me intrigued.
There you go.
There we go.
All right. Well, we will not see that until Moon Knight drops, but
right.
But when that happens, I'm sure we will cover it. Until next time, when we cover The Road to Perdition.
Yes, we'll be seeing my brother again.
Yep, which we will be recording the day after Christmas, which is wonderfully appropriate for a mob movie comic book.
Winter of 1931, was it?
Yeah. Yep. Well, until then, take it away, Vandella.
Come with me, I'll tell a story that you might have heard before. Graphically novel, but the same old trouble. Villains always knocking at the door. Pretty pictures on the page, but nothing ever stays the same. Do 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 do. Come at me, now show you something you ain't never seen before. Right or wrong, oh can't we all just get along? My mask is no different than yours. Pretty pictures on the screen, but nothing's ever